Hey everybody, John at Jodo's Garage. Welcome to this 2022 Mach 1 Mustang that's going to be turned into a 1967 Mustang Fastback. This Mustang was bought from Copart, as many others have done. Initial damage didn't seem to be too bad, but upon receiving the car was a little bit more than I thought it was going to be. So these are the external coolers. There's one on the driver's side, which is for the engine cooling, and then there's one on the passenger side as well, which is for the extra transmission cooling. Those are shot. My frame rail up here was bent. I took the upper part off already, got a new part for that right there. However, upon getting that part, it seems like this part is also bent pretty good, which initially you can already see kind of here. May opt to see if I can straighten that out, or I may have to buy another part there and do the install on that. Now, one of the bigger surprises was the radiator. Radiator cavity right here. Radiator got busted up, as well as the AC condenser. Fortunately, this small cooler was intact, so left that in place. But as you can see down below, the mounts for the radiator are sheared off, and that got me worried about the K-member in general. So the solution to that was to find a new K-member, which we did. When looking for solutions, came across website Lethal Performance, and they have a BMR K-member. Since I have nice bright red Brembos up front, I figured I'd take the red option for the K-member. So the install is going to be happening for that today. Started stripping some of the body panels off. Clearly, if you're in need of any body panels for a S550 Mustang in the New England area, hit me up. I've got an ad up on Marketplace. I have a pretty good idea why this thing ended up at Copart. Man, these tires are bold as bold can be. Well, they must have done a little off-roading and slammed the front end to get to this. The dirt got quite a ways down. However, fortunately, undercarriage doesn't seem to be affected. In order to remove the K-member, we'll have to remove the steering arm from the knuckle. Then take the lower control arms out of the K-member. Take those bolts over there and over there, the two on each side out. And then we have to remove the motor mounts and where the unit is hooked up to the frame itself. In addition, we have the sway bar arms that need to be disconnected. And of course, we'll have to take off the steering rack. Now, from some other videos that I've watched, they say it's better to leave the steering rack in the K-frame because it's hard to access those bolts. So that's what we'll be doing. First order of business, as mentioned, is removing the steering arm from the knuckle. 18mm socket, and what I usually do is get this about even with the end. A couple of taps of the hammer will come right out. Next up is removing the front lower control arm, which is a 24mm socket, followed by the rear lower control arm, which is a 22mm socket. This Mach 1 has a sensor on the lower control arm, which I'm not sure, maybe for like skip pad sensing abilities or something like that, or seeing where your control arms are at, so it knows how to dampen. But they have to come off as well. Once the bolts have been removed, you can then remove the lower control arms out of their housings, and the whole unit will hang there. This will free it up from the K-member. We will continue this on the other side. Now that we have the driver's side loose as well, we are moving on to the links for the sway bar. Of course, sometimes your bolt guide gets a little bit stuck, so you have to actually lift up on the sway bar, which I've done here. Now I can take off the nut and take the bolt out to remove that from the sway bar. The nuts are 18mm sockets, and there's an 18mm on the opposite side there as well to relieve that. As you can see here clearly, it's kind of cocked. That's where it jams up. A little bit of pumping of the jack will alleviate that pressure, and we can get that bolt out. If you're not sure whether you're going to finish the project that day, sometimes it's a good idea to put the bolts back in the original position so you know which one came from where. So here we have the motor mounts. Looks like probably two 13s, 13 or 17 or something like that. And then we have two bolts, one over this side and then one on the opposite side that holds the K-member to the frame that needs to be loosened. Because I have the sensor that goes to the lower control arm, I also have to disconnect that and take the little keeper there off the thread so I can get to the bolts. Because these coolers are kind of in my way a little bit, I decided that I'm gonna remove them. So to start with, you got to pull off these keepers. They're just a plastic piece that kind of holds things in place. And then there is a ring, a split ring, right in there that needs to come out in order to remove the line from the cooler. We'll do that next. So that is the keeper. So we'll focus on it, which I'm having a hard time doing. There we go, that's better. That goes right in this groove right there, and it comes off. And now we can just take off the oil line from the cooler, put a pan under it just in case there was any oil. This line doesn't, the other one did. Caught some transmission oil right there. So now we can remove the actual cooler unit to get it out of my way. The transmission cooler had the plastic keepers that you had to remove, and the driver's side is a little bit different in that you have these yellow covers. Here you can see that's still on, and this one I've taken off, and then you see the keeper ring that's behind it. So you just kind of pry a pick or a screwdriver in between here to remove that, and then the keeper ring is right underneath it, and then you can remove that and remove the hose. On the passenger side, I've capped off the hoses with a snag bag and some tape. Two things. Now I'm not dripping oil on the floor, and I'm also keeping anything from getting back into the lines from a contamination point of view. And the reason to put the pan there, you can see they're both draining engine oil right now, and this leaves me free now to remove these two bolts up top and get the cooler out of the way. As you can see, they did a number on the engine oil cooler that has to be replaced. Already have the new ones in the box, which is maybe a challenge once we put the 67 body on there. We may have to relocate those to a different spot, but we'll see that as we move along. Driver's side now also capped with the snag bag, a little bit of tape, and then I use some string to hold it up so it's out of my way once I have to lower the K-member. In order to get a better view of the driver's side engine front, I have removed the air intake, which gives me a lot more room here to see what I'm working with, because the next steps before we can get the K-member out is we have to support the engine, because of course the K-member supports the engine from the bottom, and we don't want the engine to fall on my head. So we have the engine support bar here. This engine support bar sits on the frame, and through a chain, I've already hooked one up into the block right there. And then I've got this other one that I'm gonna have to move just a hair, because I found by removing that air box, there's a beautiful alternator bolt here that I can hopefully get the chain around. And when I do, I put a nut on the other end of it, and that will be my other support point. That is the motor mount bolts. The forward one has been loosened already, but as you can see by the angle of the extensions here, that's not going to bite onto the bolt head properly. So in order to get there, I have to remove the strut bar, like so. In the end, it was also necessary to remove these sensors completely from the K-member, as that will have to go on to the aftermarket one. Now it's time to start loosening these bolts. Started cracking this one a little bit onto that one, and then we'll see if the engine boom is holding its weight and doing what it's supposed to do. Slowly but surely loosening these bolts. See, we're starting to get some separation between the chassis and the K-member in the back, and then also up here we're starting to see some separation, and these bolts or nuts are actually hanging loose on the frame. Now before we go to the other side, we have to make sure we disconnect the steering shaft from the steering rack in order to drop that side as well. So to remove the steering shaft from the steering rack, I'm going to take this bolt out, which is a T40. Once I get this bolt out, I can open up this crease, and then the shaft should collapse. I can move this up and out of the way. In addition to loosening the bolt, it's always a good idea to mark the shaft as well to see how it goes back together, and then not turn the steering wheel, obviously, while you're at it. To see if my motor is drooping too much, I put a level on the radiator, well, not the radiator support, but the front support bar and the throttle body. It's not quite level, but I took a picture of it, and at least that gives me a reference when I start loosening this, whether the bar here is doing its job or that I have to be concerned. Found 2 more bolts on each side in the front of the cradle, which makes sense. 18 millimeter as well. Started loosening both sides. Now we're starting to see that we also have separation with the frame over there. So we're getting close. That said, doesn't appear that our bubble has moved much, if any, which means that the engine bar is doing its job, which makes me feel better about my safety being under there. Next up will be complete removal. Welcome back, day 2. Continuing to take the K-member off, the Mustang, and we did good overnight. I'll show you the actual bubble on the level. Tightened the hooks a little bit, but overall stayed good, so feel good about that. And put a jack under here. So now it's time to start removing the bolts completely so that we can remove that cradle. So I've removed the front 2 nuts. The front nut over here, but I left that one on with a few threads just for safety. Removed the front one, but left the back one for a little bit of safety. And now that I have the jack under the front member, we can slowly see if we can release it and bring it down a bit. See what happens. All right, so it came down, as you can see. Got more separation here now, for sure. I'm sure it's now resting on that back nut, which is correct. All right, so we'll have to take those off. Found there's 2 electrical connections for the power steering. And in order to release those, you got to pop this red piece back, as well as this one, in order to remove those 2 plugs. There's also going to be a little bit more wiring here and there. Also see that we got probably a brake line here that we got to pop out of these clamps so that we can drop that down. So always a little bit more than meets the eye. So nothing's ever as easy as it seems, of course. These auxiliary oil lines for the engine cooler came out of here, and they were stuck between here. So obviously they had to go because I couldn't lower the cradle any down any further because the sway bar was hitting them. So I had to remove those. And now come to find out that they've also conveniently routed this brake line in between the cradle and the sway bar. So the sway bar has to come off, which was my initial intent, but when it's up, you can see how much space I've got now between the cradle and the frame. You could not get to the back bolt on these bushings. So that one's removed. That one will go next, and then we'll be able to load the cradle. I've now suspended the sway bar from the engine bar, so it is free floating, which then frees up the brake line, which in turn frees up the cradle. So I should now be able to release the jack and start lowering it more. And it's a beautiful thing. And just like that, we have now removed the K-member from the car. You can see a lot of the off-roading evidence when the accident happened. So, K-member removed, still has a steering rack on it. We're going to take that off and transfer it to the new K-member. Let's have a look what that new K-member looks like. Yeah, that's nice. So we got the mounts over here for the radiator, sway bar, and then the mount to the frame. Then we have the mounts here for the steering rack, and another mount here for the frame as well. And then it comes with these extension arms that are going to go to the back and into the frame. Very nice. These go up under the car and these connect right to the frame here. So I just weighed the K-member. It was 57 pounds. Then I weighed the new K-member. It was 41.5. So that's a weight savings of 15.5 pounds. So 15.5 pounds off the curb weight of the car. So the car will now only weigh like 300 pounds. So the power to weight ratio will be great. Quick install of the rubber boots for the radiator. That was an easy one. One thing that I'm really impressed with, and I mentioned it as I was taking things apart, I wonder if I'm gonna have to make my own provisions. Well, guess what? They thought of that too. There's 2 holes, and from what I could see, the bottom hole is probably where it ends up. I put in the top hole for this video, but measuring from the distance that the old K-member had, and this one, it seems like it's the bottom hole that this needs to go. So that's a nice bonus that I wasn't expecting. Probably wondering, John, what's that battery doing on the ground and this cover? Well, in the accent, we also lost the AC condenser, but also this AC condenser line. You can see how it's pinched and the end is broken off. It runs up the frame rail, and then it ends up over here, and you got to take the 10 mil loose. Well, the cover was right in this area. That needed to come off with all those, and the battery was sitting here, and that was broken, unfortunately. Well, that was literally a struggle, but it's in. You see it's running down there to where it comes out over here and clamped nicely, awaiting the connection to the condenser. I put the K-member on a creeper, put a towel in between to protect the powder coat. So now I can wheel it over and get it under the car. And then from there we'll have to get a jack under it and jack it up into position. Let's see how this works. So I've put the arms on the jack stands in a similar fashion as when I was taking the OK member off. And now I have the K member supported on the jack in the front. No protection for the powder coat again with a rag. And we are going to lift this up into position. Now, a big thing to keep in mind is to get that steering knuckle back on when you get in the right spot. Even though the directions said not to do this, I found it handy to kind of index where the frame is going to sit by putting these 4 bolts in the arms that mount to the frame here. That way it was easy to line up where these bolts are going to end up. As you can see, they're going in the right direction. And then in the front, you can also see that these are starting to line up where they need to go. Now, one of the things that you need to keep in mind is that before you go all the way up, you need to put the sway bar back onto this frame, as the back nut is not really accessible if you don't do that. So it's important to do that at this stage. Those sway bar nuts are going to be torqued to 95 pounds, and there's the hardware right there for it. With the sway bar securely fastened, it is now time to raise the K-member up further. Once the install nuts are on and just sort of hand tight, you have to come back and align these rear arms and tighten those up to 18 foot-pound. So we've tightened the body mounts, the mounts that mount the body mounts to the K-member. We've got the motor mounts secured, steering rack secured. We've got the sway bar secured. We've got the mounts to the chassis secured. So the K-member is now officially installed, torqued, and ready. Next steps, putting the suspension back to the K-member. Sometimes when you're working by yourself, you got to get a little creative in order to work. So I got to torque this bolt for the lower control arm to 184 foot-pounds, but you need two hands to do that. And so I've got this wrench on the nut on the back, and use the hose clamp to kind of hold it all together so I have my hands free. Well, life isn't real without struggle, but suspension is back in. One thing that didn't really make a lot of sense is that you use this bolt and you can't really get it in from the back because you got that wiring harness over there, and that's pretty rigid. You can't get a bolt back there, and then even if you did, you couldn't get a wrench back there, or let alone a torque wrench. So I ended up having to come from this side, but then this side, as you can see, it got a little bit damaged there. I had to grind down the edge of the bolt to clearance past there. I found out the hard way first that didn't work. So just be mindful of that. Clearance that flange on the nut if you're in the same predicament and putting one of these in. So just gonna have to touch that one up. And then of course, I clearance that flange the same way on the opposite side. And then even with already having the clearance done, I ran into trouble. No, not that big a deal. Bit of touch-up paint, like I said. But suspension, everything's back in. So this is officially finished. Now we get to go on to getting the parts in the front installed, the radiator, the AC condenser, etc. And I got to put the airbox back in first. So that's the project at hand. Well, sometimes I think this car is the gift that keeps on giving, Clark. As I was installing the K-member, found that the transmission mount is sheared off. So that's on order, but just another find to keep me from getting this thing drivable again, unfortunately. Well, car loving peeps, hope that was informational. It's my first YouTube video, so go easy on me, but I enjoy doing it. Hope you learned something there. If you're in the same predicament and want to install one of these K-members, for me it was more of a necessity. But yeah, there you have it. See you on the next one.